Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet.
Ad Astra, the podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack, your resident space policy advocate.
And I'm Newton, I'm your guy for space technology.
All right, everyone, so before we get this short episode kicked off, me and Newton have a bit of an announcement for everyone.
Yeah, you may have noticed that we've been a little busy lately. We officially apologize for missing last week's episode. Last week was a bit rough for both of us. Both Jack, I know you with work, and me getting ready to quit my job. So things have been a little rough lately, but they will smooth out a little bit soon. We just have a couple of announcements to make. The first is that, unfortunately, we will be leaving the Elemental FM network. Unfortunately, we will be in a period of transition for the next few months as we latch on to another network in hopefully within the Washington, D.C. area, something a little closer to home that aligns a little bit more with our schedules, if you will.
And we're also just between all of that and being just like NASA in transition, we have made the decision collectively that we are going to switch from a weekly space policy and technology podcast to a bi-weekly, the version of bi-weekly that means every other week, not twice a week.
But it's not forever. It's not forever.
Not forever.
It's
forever. Indefinite, but not forever.
Right. Basically, once we find a network, we will be changing our schedule once again, but this current schedule without our network and to adhere to both our schedules and to give you the best show that we possibly can, we'll need to shift things over just temporarily to a bi-weekly podcast. So with that, I think we can move on to the show.
Yeah. Newton, let's do a quick rundown of what we're talking about today.
In latest from Washington, we're going to be talking about budget. We'll be talking about the new budget that was passed.
Yep, passed and signed by the president. So it is law.
There you go. That's right. Yes, because it goes until September. Wow. It has been a while. See, we're busy. Well, we're going to talk about the space news highlight of the week, which is the delay, once again, of our favorite telescope that has not launched yet, the James Webb Space Telescope. Then we'll talk a little bit about a Chinese satellite crashing into Earth. Then in latest in tech, we'll talk SpaceX launching some cargo to ISS. And then in Coming Soon to Space, we'll talk about another event in the DC area. All right, Jack, take it away. How's the budget? What's happening with NASA? How much money are we getting, and what are we using it for?
So clearly the biggest thing that happened in the last 2 weeks was the passing and signing of the Omnibus budget deal that was ironed out in the Congress just about 2 weeks ago. So on March 23rd, the Congress, both houses of Congress, passed this omnibus bill, and the president, although threatening to veto it, signed the deal.
I'm never going to sign a bill like this again. You guys get one. Everybody gets one.
Yeah, we'll see about that. But ultimately, those
are literally the words of the president of the United States, by the way. I just want to clarify that. I wasn't making that up. That's word for word what he said. Go on.
Yeah, it's like a stern parent that you know is not really serious.
I'm going to sign it this time.
But next
really,
time,
dude?
You better watch out. Anyway, so this omnibus deal is actually amazing for NASA. NASA gets the biggest budget that it's ever gotten as a number, as an amount of money, $20.7 billion. That's billion with a B, going
Billions.
To the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So this omnibus bill, which for those who, maybe this is your first time hearing us talk about this, an omnibus bill is not like a regular budget where it goes through regular order. That hasn't happened since 1997. An omnibus bill is just a collection of smaller bills that come from the different subcommittees within the Congress that deal with appropriations. So each portion of the federal government is broken up to about 12 different areas. And so CJS, the Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies is a portion of this omnibus bill that got passed, and that includes NASA, includes NOAA, includes Commerce and Justice, but other science programs as well. So within those $20.7 billion, NASA basically gets a top-line increase in all but really 2 areas. And that's amazing for us space advocates. I mean, it seems like everything that we had fought for over the last year is appearing. So for example, within this 20.7 billion, 6.2 of that is going to science, which the science program is broken up into 4 areas: Earth science, planetary science, heliophysics, and astrophysics. Earth science was the one that was proposed to be cut the most. So between the enacted 2017 fiscal year 2017 budget and the requested fiscal year 2018 budget that the president requested last year, see episode like 5 or something from the beginning of the show, there was a difference of $166 million that was cut from that was being proposed to cut from Earth science from fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 18. Within that 166 million, we can go into all the different programs they wanted to cut, but mainly they wanted to cut the satellites and the programs that would really be, helping us do the Earth science portion of what NASA does. Planetary science also saw a major boost. Obviously, that's something that is a little bit less controversial. It went from the $1,828,000,000 that it got in 2017 to, for the remaining portion of fiscal year 2018, it will have a budget of $2.2 billion.
So the president put out this skinny budget, right? Back in, what was it, February, that really cut many of NASA's programs as well as other programs that have been highly funded under this omnibus spending bill. I mean, I have, we have the list here, and you can look this up online, but NIH is receiving $37 billion, NSF is receiving $7.8 billion, and that's incredibly misaligned with the skinny budget that the president put out. I mean, we already saw that Trump said, "Oh, I'll never sign this again." But how did they coordinate in the first place with the Republicans in order to get this bill passed?
Well, clearly there wasn't much coordination between the president and Republicans in Congress. And that kind of goes to show the divide between, politically and ideologically, between the president and the Congress. Of course, they're both Republicans. Republicans control both the Senate and the House as well as the White House. But there seems to be a very clear difference in ideology between these 2 branches of government. And the Congress has a lot more in mind when it's making these decisions, has a lot more stakeholders to engage with, has a lot more people that they can rely upon for information to give them the best budget numbers. So as an example, one of the programs that is getting an increase in funding is the Space Launch System, which we've talked quite a bit about.
SLS.
And
SLS,
of course, a lot of members of Congress have SLS production, supply, something happening in their district. And so they have to talk to those suppliers, those manufacturers, those engineers, scientists, business leaders, all of that when making this budget. And they give their number. Of course, they want more money, but, and Congress says, well, we only have this much money to give. And you go through this back and forth, whereas the White House is coming at this from an angle of ideology and saying, this is what we're proclaiming that we want for this program. So for an example, so SLS, comparing it to the enacted FY 2017 budget with this omnibus, it remains flat. It's $2.1 billion for SLS. In the president's budget request for fiscal year 2018, they cut it by 212 million. So as you can see, there is sort of this misalignment between the White House and the Congress when it comes to what they want to do with the space program. And I think that trickles down to every aspect of science, and really every aspect of our federal government, is that the Congress has a lot more at stake because they are directly representing these constituencies and have the closest ear to the ground to what's going on in these departments, even though they're the legislative branch and NASA is part of the executive branch. So there's all these conversations that happen both behind closed doors and in front of press conferences that help the Congress move numbers in one direction or the other. And as we talked about last year, the president's budget request is an anchor point. They take this and they set that on the table and they say, all right, this is what the president's requesting. Everything that we do is going to be done in context of this. So if we're going to increase the budget and the president proposes cutting the budget, it's not just an increase over the previous year, but an increase over what the president is requesting. And that divergence from the president ideologically can have some political repercussions as well. And I'm sure we're going to see that as 2018 ramps up and a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats are facing tough re-elections all across the country. So for an example, just looking at the votes for this, the Senate voted 65-32 in favor. There are only 51 Republicans in the Senate, meaning that there were 14 Democrats who voted for this. There's those 32, which they're probably all running for president or something. And then within the House, there's 256 to 167, which again, there are more, that's more in the 256 than there are Republicans in that House of Congress. So there's going to be political repercussions here, but also you have to think about this in terms of we finally have a budget after 2 shutdowns in just as many months. It's good to see that we don't have to worry. We don't have to govern from crisis to crisis.
Well, but we could be creeping up on another crisis here because between this and the tax overhaul, those two comprise the biggest financial stimulus since the Great Recession of 2009. And in all likelihood, that may trigger another recession, probably post 2018, but the economy, particularly at this point, can't typically handle that kind of rush of, first having a giant swath of money taken out of it and then, state that and basically a statement saying that we're going to spend another giant swath of money. So we'll see. We'll have to see how this ends up, but this may end up backfiring.
Yeah.
Correction. This will end up backfiring. I'm not an economist, but you can quote me on that.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at all previous Republican administrations, a recession of some sort has happened in the tail end of their administration. Democratic presidents don't tend to get that. I'm just saying, you don't have to take my word for it, but I think there is a correlation between leadership within government and the lack thereof and economic prosperity.
And with that, we will move on.
I'm putting the opinionated in the most opinionated space policy podcast on the internet.
We're going to move on to talking about spending more government dollars on our favorite telescope, the gift that we just keep giving to, the James Webb Space Telescope. So just a reminder for those of you who are new, those of you who haven't listened to me speak ever, the James Webb Space Telescope is a 6.5 meter, 21 foot wide telescope that was planned most recently to launch back in 2019. Basically, this telescope is the largest space telescope that we've ever built and will sit at what's called a Lagrangian point on the Earth's on the other side of the moon. Effectively, Lagrangian points are these, think of them as gravitational balance points in the Earth-Moon system, and this is one that would sit effectively stationary on the other side of the moon, and it will help us to see farther than we've ever seen before. Under one condition, we actually build it and get it launched. So as of right now, in the last couple of weeks, based on information from the Project Standing Review Board, NASA officials have decided to delay the telescope's launch window to roughly May 2020. How do you feel about that, Jack? Collective sigh from the audience.
So in terms of it as James Webb as a mission, I am all in favor of pushing it off if that means that we can guarantee that it's going to get up there. I mean, you can't guarantee anything in science, but as close to a guarantee as you can
But
possibly
you can
get.
in engineering. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, it's a massive project, and the
It
U.S.
is.
has
It
sunk
is.
close to this $8.8 billion into the project,
Which we'll probably go over, so there's a few things to note here. You bring up the sort of primary topic to talk about, which is launch delay is about getting it right. Right, that's the primary cause of the delay, so that NASA can be as confident as possible before the launch. Keep in mind, we're sitting this thing on the other side of the moon. So once we do this, there's not going to be a way of repairing the James Webb Space Telescope, or JWST, if something goes wrong out there in space. And they just want to ensure that everything is in the best shape it can be before sending it all the way out there. A quote from Thomas Zurbuchen himself basically relayed this point. Simply put, we have one shot to get this right before going into space. You've heard this before. Failure is not an option, and it can't be an option with the James Webb Space Telescope. We've already sunk billions, literally billions of dollars into this, and we can't go back. This is literally the definition of a sunk cost at this point. And we have seen things go wrong in the past, particularly, on other space missions, but also with James Webb. Some of the most recent delays were associated with primarily hardware errors, like when they discovered that the sun shield's tension creating cables were too slack. That could have risked that the cables would snag on something as the sun shield unfolded, keeping it from deploying. Also, contractor Northrop Grumman also accidentally put several small tears into the sun shield. And during tests, scientists even discovered that the propulsion system could have allowed leaks. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, allowed leaks from the telescope's thruster valves. So there's a myriad of errors. There's so many things that can go wrong on this system, both from the hardware computing side to the propulsion side. This is a big gamble that we're putting out there. This is one of our riskier missions. Yeah, it's not manned, but it's extremely risky. We're sinking a lot of money into this, and we want to make sure that we get it right. And like you said, Jack, we are $8 billion in, and we can't just go back at this point. Going back at this point would be a monumental waste of money. And the final point to make here before we get off of this is that there are other projects that are kind of riding on this to happen, right? Having more delays in this could potentially slow down other space projects or get them canceled. I mean, you already saw that in the president's skinny budget. He wanted to cancel W first, which is it's effectively the next James Webb Space Telescope. It stands for Wide Field Infrared Survey Telescope, which, I mean, effectively is going to be Hubble on steroids. The success of this project really speaks to the success of future projects in this space. And we want to see it pass. So good luck to the James Webb Space Telescope. We apparently won't be going down to French Guiana in 2019, Jack, for a yacht party.
For our tour and yacht party.
The yacht party will have to wait until 2020. You got anything else to say on this one?
I'm going to piggyback off of what you said last, is that the future of many missions depends on this. And W First is just the most prevalent one because it is a direct follow-up to this mission. I mean, it's supposed to follow up after this mission's lifespan of it's 5 years, right? This
5 years
is supposed to operate.
Yeah. Quote, I'm using air quotes here, by the way. This is NASA. 5 years, sure.
Yeah, I mean, Hubble was supposed to last for 5 years, and we have it 25 years later. But the W First is the most direct successor to the James Webb, and a mid 2020s spacecraft is still a little far out for some people to grasp, and so it's easier to cut. But I mean, looking at other non-manned spacecraft, it pushing this off or gutting it or whatever ends up happening with it could have a detrimental effect on missions, planetary science missions, astrophysical missions, heliophysical missions. I mean, it's as we were talking earlier, that Earth science is the most political part of NASA's budget. The other three portions of NASA's Science Mission Directorate are not as political, but something like this happening where there's a proposal to gut James Webb or cancel the program, or to speed it up and have a less than nominal launch, will ultimately impact these future missions. So I like that they're pushing this off till 2020. It's the best move for the program, not just the James Webb Space Telescope program, but the space program overall. It'll just be interesting to see how they handle these cost overruns should they happen. I mean, they're anticipated at this point, but Zurbuchen's going to have to stand up in front of the Appropriations Committee and explain why he's going to need an extra $500 million to make sure that the spacecraft that we've already sunk $8.8 billion in is going to need that funding boost.
Right, and it'll also be interesting to see what the National Academy of Sciences has to say about it in the next decadal survey. Whether or not they'll state that, well, what we need is another large telescope if we can't get this one up in time.
Well, yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because the decadal survey process will already be in full swing by the time this launches.
Exactly.
So the actual survey itself might not even have the data from the James Webb Space Telescope to extrapolate on.
But that's my point. They're going to go into it with potentially without even knowing the benefits of it, and just knowing that this that this telescope took a really long time to build. Maybe we shouldn't include another one in the next decadal survey. So we'll have to see.
I could see them not mentioning James Webb maybe in passing, but having maybe like an addendum afterward, having a workshop just on James Webb, that they produce a addendum report.
Here's what went wrong.
Yeah. Here's what went wrong, and recommendations for the next space-based telescope.
Absolutely. So one thing that we hope James Webb doesn't do is fall into the sky in a very unknown and unpredictable way, much like the Chinese satellite Tiangong-1. The Tiangong-1 module, whose uncontrolled reentry had been watched with both anticipation and apprehension, returned to Earth harmlessly over the South Pacific Ocean late April 1st. The spacecraft's 10.4 meter long body is made up of two cylinders of approximately equal length, a service module, and an experiment module. China didn't declare any sort of landing area, although somehow the final splashdown is in what they were calling the spacecraft cemetery. Meanwhile, many agencies gave a prediction of as big as half a planet as the crash area, with a couple of them giving more precise locations that were obviously inaccurate. We hope that China learned a lot from this endeavor, but we'll have to see. A statement by the U.S. Air Force's Joint Force Space Component Command, because they were watching this heavily, at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, said that the spacecraft re-entered at approximately 8:16 p.m. Eastern, April 1st, over the South Pacific, far from any inhabited land masses. Chinese officials also reported that the spacecraft re-entered at approximately 8:15 p.m. Eastern, according to a statement from the China Manned Space Engineering Office. So they were just kind of slightly off from each other. But this is something that we've known was coming for a little while now. As of mid-January 2018, the spacecraft was at about 280 kilometers altitude in an orbit that was going to inevitably decay. They thought it would mostly burn up due to the extreme heat generated by its high speeds passage through the atmosphere. Following its initial launch in 2011, its orbit began steadily decaying due to the faint yet not zero atmospheric drag present even at 300 or 400 kilometers altitude. This affects, just for clarification, this affects all satellites and spacecraft in low Earth orbit, like ISS, for example. And as a result, such craft must conduct regular reboost maneuvers to maintain their orbit. Typically, ground controllers command the craft's engines or thrusters to fire for a certain amount of time, speeding it up so that it gains altitude. I mean, something similar is going to have to happen with James Webb, as we were just mentioning it. Yes, it's going to sit at L2, but it's going to shift around, so it needs to use thrust in order to sort of push it back into that stationary area in the Earth Moon system. Most satellites that are in orbit have to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, altitude adjustments. And that's also in part why it's at a Lagrangian point, was because that's the most stable gravitational point, so it's easier to do that.
Lowest fuel required to keep it stable and whatnot. So
exactly.
During its operational life from launch through December 2015, those maneuvers just kept it in balance. And they initially planned a controlled reentry for the spacecraft at the end of its life. That means that ground controllers would have commanded the engines to fire, slowing the craft by a significant amount so they would fall towards the surface. Firing the engines would have been done at a specific moment so that it would re-enter the atmosphere and substantially burn up over a large unpopulated region of the South Pacific Ocean. However, in March 2016, the Tiangong-1 space station ceased functioning but maintained its structural integrity. Insofar as can be fully confirmed, ground teams lost control with the craft, and it could no longer be commanded to fire its engines. That's how we ended up with this uncontrolled reentry. They effectively just lost communications with it. So, trying to throw a satellite at us. That's what I'm going with.
and missed by a couple thousand kilometers.
Just a couple thousand kilometers. That's what happens when you steal all your research. Moving on, SpaceX Dragon. Latest in tech, SpaceX launches cargo to ISS.
Ooh, CRS-14.
Woohoo! A SpaceX Falcon 9 successfully launched a Dragon spacecraft on April 2nd, carrying more than 2.5 tons of cargo for the International Space Station. The Falcon 9, flying SpaceX's 7th mission of the year, lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, good old SLC 40, in Florida at 4:30 p.m. Eastern on April 2nd. The Dragon spacecraft separated from the Falcon 9's upper stage 10 minutes after liftoff. The Dragon carried nearly about 2,600 kilograms of cargo for the space station on this mission. CRS-14, for those who aren't in the know, CRS stands for Commercial Resupply Services, and this is mission number 14. SpaceX has had this contract for how long, Jack?
Since 2011? 2012?
Okay, so
yeah.
That sounds right, so we're going to claim it as true. Hard-hitting reporting here on Ad Astra. We'll look it up and include it in the show notes. Or you can look it up and write it on our Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Ad Astra podcast. So, yes, this is the 14th mission that SpaceX has flown under the CRS contract with NASA. The cargo included more than 1,000 kilograms of science investigation inside the Dragon spacecraft and more than 900 kilograms of external payloads in its trunk. After the launch, Dragon will slowly raise its orbit or hover alongside the ISS in the safe zone and gently approach to be captured by the space station remote manipulating system, also known as Jack?
Canadarm.
Canadarm 2, actually.
It's just the Canadarm to me.
Canadarm 2, The Reckoning. And it's to be birthed to the ISS at a common birthing mechanism. I love that phrase. It also has a secondary mission, actually, and SpaceX is currently retiring its Block 3 and Block 4 boosters to make way for Block 5. We may see a controlled reentry to test new, more aggressive landing profiles, but neither O'Sisley or Mr. Steven, who resides on the West Coast, are deployed for this mission, so neither the booster nor the fairings are actually being recovered for this.
Womp womp.
Womp womp.
Expendable rockets. We can't do with those anymore, can we?
I know. You just show it off to us once and then we're done. Anyway, yeah. So SpaceX launched cargo, another SpaceX mission. I'm here for it.
Well, so what was really interesting about the CRS mission was that it's actually the second time that particular booster flew a CRS mission. The previous time was in CRS 12.
Oh, look at that.
And then, we crash it into the ocean or China.
But that's important. We've been, yeah. A controlled, how about we start having some uncontrolled reentries, China? How would you like that? No, please, let's not prime John Bolton.
Just throw space trash at each other.
Yeah, that's where we're headed. We all know that's where we're headed, right? All right. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. What do you got in coming soon to space?
So the big thing coming soon, actually this week, Saturday and Sunday, is the USA Science and Engineering Festival, which is the biennial premier festival for all things science and engineering, hence the name, uh, for the country. So every 2 years, the Walter Washington Convention Center is filled to the brim with cool science experiments, presentations from scientists, engineers, business leaders, thought leaders, and government agencies, companies. All those things happen all under one roof. It is an awesome experience. I will unfortunately not be able to attend most of it. However, our friends over at Explore Mars are going to have their own booth right next to SpaceX, by the way, that they're going to be passing out information about the Humans to Mars Summit, which is coming up in May, as well as some of the other cool things that they're doing. If you are able to go to this weekend between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., I think are the operating hours on Saturday and Sunday.
April 7th and April 8th. Yeah.
Yeah, I highly recommend that you go do that. It's free and open to the public. You don't need to purchase any passes like you do at AwesomeCon, and it's metro accessible. It's right there on the yellow line, right close to the red line as well. So get your science gear on and head over to the convention center in downtown DC.
Absolutely. And one interesting thing, NASA obviously will be there leading up to the main
They always
event.
have the coolest booth too.
They really do. They really do. They really will this year. They're bringing a universe of discovery to the festival this year. Leading up to the main event, they're going to hold a media availability event at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, April 6th, with agency's acting chief technologist Douglas Terrier and other agency experts who will be on hand to discuss the NASA missions that are inspiring today's youth, the Mars generation, as they call them. So during the Science and Engineering Festival, festival visitors can come to NASA's interactive and informative exhibit at booth 5509 in the Space Exploration Pavilion, Hall E, to learn about Mars, viewing the universe through Hubble's lens, our sun, star of the Milky Way, and much, much more. So make sure to, once again, go to booth 5509 in the Space Exploration Pavilion, Hall E, for NASA's amazing exhibit.
You will not miss them.
Yeah.
They always have. I remember it from 2 years ago. They had an awesome display. And even then they were doing stuff with augmented reality and VR and all this really cool stuff they were doing 2 years ago. I can't imagine what they're going to bring this year.
Seriously, I promise you this will be better than AwesomeCon, especially this year. AwesomeCon was kind of weak this year. Step your game up, AwesomeCon.
You heard it here first. Newton
it was rough.
Endorses AwesomeCon.
It was rough. Look, listen, if it gets them to step their game up, look, I will call them out on it. I will have to say this though. They did AwesomeCon over Passover and Easter, and there's a lot of religious folk out there or people who just want to go hang out with their families over those holidays. So I get why they couldn't get all the stars and get tons of people involved, but all I can say to that is pick a better day to have AwesomeCon, because it was kind of weak this year.
And it's not like you won't end up going every year after this.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going literally I love AwesomeCon, but it was kind of weak this year. Step your game up. All right. Anyway, you got anything else to say?
That is everything I got. Again, thank you to everyone who downloads and listens to these episodes. I know it's been frustrating for some of you to have lapses in episodes. I know you guys wait with bated breath for the next episode of Ad Astra to come out.
I had to calm some folks down. I mean, really, it was... We were in crisis mode out there.
There was almost a riot in the streets in DC. It was ridiculous. But in all actuality, I know it's frustrating, and we haven't been on the perfect schedule the last couple of months. There's just a lot going on, both personally, professionally, and as a network or as a show transitioning from network to a network. But yeah, no, just overall, a lot going on. Thank you all for being patient, and we will start doing bi-weekly episodes starting this week. So we will not have an episode next week, the week of April 9th, but we will have an episode the week of April 16th coming out on Wednesdays. I will try to hold myself to that as much as humanly possible.
Oh, and we didn't get to say this. We didn't get to say this last week, but shout out to the kids from March for Our Lives. That was a life-changing march.
Yeah.
From a couple of weeks ago. Shout out to Emma Gonzalez and all of her classmates and all the folks at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, as well as all of the other teenage speakers that came out. We didn't get to announce that last week, but I wanted to make sure that we announced that because that was an amazing march. And if you're not involved, get involved. If you want to find out ways to get involved, message us on Facebook. And we're parts of multiple organizations that are trying to do, get organized and do things like gun violence, as well as other activities that we see ourselves in this era of politics.
Yeah. Also register to vote. So that's also a thing.
Register to vote. I cannot stress this enough.
Anyway, so I don't really have anything else to talk about. Anything for you, Newton?
Nada.
All right. Well, as always, I'm your host, Jack.
And I'm Newton
at Astro.